Today I'm going to share with you 3 New York sports stories that you need to hear in order to really believe. I'm not even convinced that you're going to think that the last story is real. So with that being said, let's just get right into it. At the end of the regular season, the National Hockey League gives 16 teams the opportunity to compete for the Stanley Cup trophy. The Stanley Cup dates back to 1893. It is the oldest existing trophy that gets awarded to a sports franchise in North America. The cup has been through a lot over the years. The most common thing to do with the cup is to pour alcohol into the bowl, usually champagne, and then players will take turns drinking out of it. However, other things have happened with this cup. Players have had their children baptized in the cup. 3 players have even allowed their dogs to eat dog food out of the cup. But all things considered, these are pretty harmless things that somebody could do with the cup. But then there's the 1940 New York Rangers. Throughout the 1939-1940 NHL season, the New York Rangers finished second in the standings in a league that only had 7 teams. But this was for the regular season. This wasn't the playoffs. With the way the playoff brackets worked, the Rangers would have to beat 2 teams in a best-of-7 series in order to win the Stanley Cup trophy. Basically, they'd have to win 8 games total throughout the playoffs. Now, their first matchup would be in the semifinals against the top-seeded Boston Bruins, but they were able to put away the Bruins in 6 games. They were even able to celebrate going to the Stanley Cup Finals on their home ice at Madison Square Garden, although not the MSG that everyone knows today. You see, Madison Square Garden has been rebuilt over and over again throughout the years. The first 2 Madison Square Gardens used to stand right next to Madison Square Park, which hopefully makes sense. However, in 1925, MSG moved away from Madison Square and was rebuilt on the west side of 8th Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets. This is where present-day Worldwide Plaza sits. Now, the Rangers felt like the Stanley Cup was theirs for the taking. Too many things were going right. It seemed impossible that they would lose. For starters, the top-seeded Boston Bruins, who led the league in number of goals scored throughout the year, failed to score any goals in 3 of their 4 losses. The New York Rangers goalie was playing very well. Another thing the Rangers had going for them was the mortgage for Madison Square Garden was finally officially paid off. It was like the building had even given its blessing to the team to go win it all. The Rangers faced off against the 3rd-seeded Toronto Maple Leafs in the finals. The first 2 games were being played at MSG, and that first night, the Rangers would defeat the Maple Leafs 2-1 in overtime. Overtime is played if there's a tie at the end of regulation, and it becomes sudden death. Whoever scores first wins. They played again the following night, although the Rangers had a much easier time winning this game, as they scored 6 goals where the Maple Leafs only scored 2. So now, the Rangers only need to win 2 more games before they can hoist the Stanley Cup trophy. Now, the next few games were being played in Toronto, and it was totally possible that the Rangers could win the Stanley Cup trophy while they were away from Madison Square Garden. Now, somebody on the team suggested that if that should happen, if they should win the Stanley Cup while they were away in Toronto, they should bring the Madison Square Garden mortgage with them and destroy it as part of their celebration. After 5 games, the Rangers had a 3-2 advantage over the Maple Leafs, and they had won Game 5 in thrilling fashion. They won it in double overtime. At the end of regulation in Game 6, once again, the score was tied, so the game was headed to overtime for a 3rd time in the series. The Rangers were feeling very confident going into overtime because they hadn't lost any overtime games in the playoffs. It took most of the 20-minute overtime period, but about 18 minutes into it, the Rangers finally put the puck in the back of the net. They had just won the Stanley Cup. They go back to the locker room, everyone's celebrating, they're going crazy, they're pouring champagne into the cup, and they're drinking out of the cup. And then someone brought out the mortgage for Madison Square Garden. Remember, even though it's only 1940, that's still plenty of time for people to have done stupid things with this cup. For example, in 1905, when the Ottawa Senators won the trophy, one player took the trophy while celebrating and kicked it like a soccer ball into a frozen canal. In 1924, the Montreal Canadiens accidentally left the cup on the side of the highway after changing a flat tire. So what stupid thing could the Rangers add on to this ever-growing list of stupid things that have happened with the Stanley Cup? They decided to burn the MSG mortgage in the cup. So they took the papers and they tossed them into the bowl of the cup, and then they doused them with alcohol, and then they set them on fire. And then the players are laughing as they're watching these documents burn, but then they quickly realized, this flame isn't going out. This was a problem because the only liquid in this locker room was alcohol, which is not going to help you put out a fire. Before anyone could run for help or find a fire extinguisher, the players jumped to their feet, circled up around the trophy, dropped their pants, and began urinating on the Stanley Cup trophy. I know it's a locker room, but I mean, come on. Now, the flames did go out, so their unorthodox method of extinguishing this fire did work, but at what cost? When news came out about what the Rangers did to the trophy, it seemed like an unforgivable act. This seemed wrong. And so it's believed that by going number 1 on the trophy that made the Rangers number 1, they accidentally started a curse on their franchise. Come on, I'm proud of that one. The New York Rangers did not win another Stanley Cup in that Madison Square Garden, which was demolished in 1968. In fact, after moving into the next MSG, which is the current one, a new team joined the league, the New York Islanders, and they played out in Long Island. Not only did the Islanders win the Stanley Cup before the Rangers could again, but they won it 4 consecutive times from 1980 to 1983. By the time they won their 4th championship, the Islanders in their 11-year history already had more Stanley Cup wins than the Rangers had in their 57-year history. What makes this stat so mind-boggling is there was only 6 teams in the league up until 1967. By the time the Islanders won their championships, there were 21 teams in the league. It would take over 50 years, but the Rangers would eventually break the curse and win the Stanley Cup in 1994. Fans of the New York Islanders and the New Jersey Devils often used to chant 1940 when the Rangers came to play against them. However, after the Stanley Cup was won by the Rangers in 1994, on their home ice, the Ranger fans at Madison Square Garden chanted 1940 to recognize that the curse had finally been lifted. Hockey players in the NHL know this story, as well as all the other ridiculous things that have been in that cup, and yet still, for whatever reason, they love to drink champagne out of it. There are a few holidays throughout a calendar year that people would probably say are American holidays. For example, you have Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Flag Day, but my guess is if you were to poll all of America and say what is the most American holiday, I'd imagine most people would say the 4th of July. While most Americans celebrate the 4th of July by wearing their red, white, and blue colors and going to a barbecue and watching fireworks at the expense of everyone's pets, Coney Island does something very different. Now, if you don't know, Coney Island is on the southwestern edge of Brooklyn. It has a beach, a boardwalk, a theme park. In fact, that theme park was home to America's very first roller coaster in 1884. But I want to go back to the boardwalk. Along that boardwalk is a fast food restaurant called Nathan's Famous. Nathan's Famous opened in 1916 and specializes in hot dogs, which is one of the most American foods that there is. Nathan Hanwerker opened his hot dog stand with his wife, and together they sold hot dogs for 5 cents while a nearby restaurant sold them for 10 cents. Now, a big advantage that their cart had was Nathan's boasted having kosher-style hot dogs because Nathan himself was a Jewish-Polish immigrant, and so he said that none of his hot dogs contained pork or horse meat. At a time when the ingredients in a hot dog were a little suspect, Nathan made sure that people like surgeons were seen outside of his hot dog cart eating his hot dogs, and this worked. He became very successful. These days, Nathan's Famous participates in one of the most bizarre 4th of July traditions out there. They host an international hot dog eating contest. This might not seem that crazy. Maybe you've been to a block party or a county fair or something where they have some sort of food eating contest. No, what makes it strange is the kind of publicity that this gets. This contest has aired on ESPN since 2003. Thousands of people go to watch it in person, and millions of people watch it from their living rooms. The way the contest works is as many as 20 contestants line up and try to eat as many hot dogs and buns as they can in 10 minutes. We also get someone that stands behind them, and their job is literally just to count how many hot dogs and buns are being eaten, even get a color commentator along the way. Condiments are allowed, although they're rarely used, and up until 2010, men and women used to compete right alongside one another. Now they have separate contests. The winner of the men's contest wins the bejeweled mustard yellow belt, while the winner of the women's contest wins the Pepto-Bismol-sponsored pink belt. Maybe the strangest thing about this contest, though, is that nobody seems to know how it even started. A promoter was asked how it started, and he said that back in 1916 there was a group of immigrants right outside of Nathan's having an argument about which of them was the most American. And then they figured the right way to settle this argument was to see who could eat the most hot dogs. However, the promoter later admitted that he made the story up just for publicity's sake. The earliest results table ever found were from 1957 for a man named Paul Washburn, who apparently won the contest. He was described as a one-armed Brooklyn Carnival worker. And then it does seem like the contest has run most years since 1972, although there are a couple years in the 1970s that there's no records. This event has been sanctioned by Major League Eating since 1997. Now let's get into some numbers. By 2000, the highest number of hot dogs ever consumed in the contest, and what was a 12-minute contest at the time, was 25 1/8 hot dogs. And then in 2001, Japanese competitive eater Takeru Kobayashi blew that record out of the water. In 12 minutes, Kobayashi managed to eat 50 hot dogs, nearly double the record. He had this new method where he would break the hot dogs in half so he could eat them twice as fast, and then he would eat the bun after eating the hot dog. It wasn't until Kobayashi entered the contest that people were starting to talk, wow, I gotta see that, which is why ESPN started airing the contest. Kobayashi would win the contest 6 consecutive times from 2001 until 2006. He had revolutionized the hot dog eating contest. And then in 2007, he finally lost to who many people would probably consider the greatest competitive eater of all time, Joey Chestnut. Joey Chestnut has participated in this event every year since 2007, and he has won every single year since 2007, with the exception of 2015 when he lost to Matt Stoney. Even though 2 minutes have been shaved off of the contest, Joey Chestnut is still setting absurd records for how many hot dog and buns he's eating. As of this video's publishing date, which is June 23rd, 2023, Joey Chestnut's record is 76 hot dogs and buns in 10 minutes, meaning that he ate more than one hot dog every 8 seconds. If you want to maintain your sanity, I wouldn't look up the nutrition facts for that record. The winningest woman since 2011 is Miki Sudo, who has won the contest 8 times. Her best finish was in 2020 when she finished with 48.5 hot dog and buns in 10 minutes. Oh, and another rule of the contest, I almost forgot. You are disqualified if obviously if you're looking at this video after July 4th, 2023, you'll need to look up if the records have changed. Horse racing has been popular in the United States since 1665 when it was first introduced in New York. In 1923, spectators at the steeplechase race at Belmont Park in Queens witnessed something that had never happened before and has never happened since. And when you hear what it is, you're not going to believe it. Frank Hayes was a horse trainer and stableman, and despite his small size, he was not a jockey, but he wanted to be. Hayes worked for a wealthy woman named Miss A.M. Frayling, and Miss Frayling owned a horse named Sweet Kiss. Now, Miss Frayling really didn't see this horse as a racing horse, but Hayes thought that Sweet Kiss had potential, so he trained it hoping that he could change Miss Frayling's mind. They put in hours and hours of training, and eventually this horse race was coming up at Belmont, and Hayes went to Miss Frayling and tried to convince her that they were ready to compete. But there was a problem. Hayes was outside of the weight class in order to qualify to be a jockey. He was too heavy. And so even though Frank had swayed Miss Frayling into thinking this horse was ready to compete, he himself was not. So she told him, if you're capable of getting your weight down, you have my blessing. Now, to compete at Belmont, that's a big deal. It first opened in 1905, and ever since, it has been considered one of the world's finest horse racing tracks. And so Hayes put himself through this rigorous training, hoping that by the time this race rolled around, that he'd be able to join the contest. Now, did it seem silly to go through all of this training just to probably lose this contest? Yes. You see, Sweet Kiss had 20-1 odds to win, meaning that if you bet $1 on Sweet Kiss to win this race, you could win $20. In other words, this venue does not have a lot of faith that Sweet Kiss can win this race. They are happy to take your money if you want to bet on the horse to win. Not only that, but this horse and jockey had literally never competed before, so it didn't seem very likely that they would win their very first race. Then, when we get to the day before the race, Hayes is still 10 pounds overweight. It was looking less and less likely that they'd even be able to join the race at all. Now, nobody really knows how he did this, but the very next day, he somehow lost those 10 pounds. Miss Frayling couldn't believe it, but she thought, you know what? Maybe this is destiny. And so she allowed Frank Hayes to escort Sweet Kiss to the racetrack. This was not going to be an easy task. Remember, Belmont, even back then, is a major racetrack. It is one of the 3 major racetracks for professionals. There's the Kentucky Derby, there's Preakness, and there's the Belmont Stakes. Now, even though this horse race that they're competing in isn't the Belmont Stakes, this is still going to be a huge challenge. They were competing in something called a steeplechase. A steeplechase is closer to an obstacle course version of a horse race. You'd have to jump over fences and ditches along your race. When they got there, Hayes kind of just looks around. He tries to take everything in. He can't believe that he's about to join his very first horse race ever. He's nervous, but he's also excited. And before the moment could get too big for him, officials started rounding up all the competitors and had them line up at the starting line. So Hayes guided Sweet Kiss to the starting line, and he climbs up onto the horse and positions himself on the saddle. And then they just waited. The gunshot fired to signal the beginning of the race, and the horses were off. Now, the crowd was cheering for a horse named Gimme. That was the fan favorite. That was the horse that the most people had put money on. And Gimme was out to a lead to start the race. But miraculously, Sweet Kiss was not that far behind. It was actually stunning to the crowd how close this race was at the halfway point. Hayes could feel Sweet Kiss gaining momentum while jumping these hurdles and guided the horse into its final turn. In fact, Hayes couldn't believe what he was seeing. His horse was about to take the lead, and then Sweet Kiss did, and the crowd started going nuts. The track straightened out, and then Gimme and Sweet Kiss were neck and neck with one another, but Sweet Kiss was slightly ahead. Hayes kind of fell forward onto the horse, and the wind resistance around him was much smaller. And by a head, Sweet Kiss pulled out the victory. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. They just saw a first-time entrant win their very first race. But in a moment, they would realize that they had actually witnessed something much, much crazier. After crossing the finish line, Sweet Kiss continued to run for a little bit before starting to slow down, but Frank Hayes wasn't letting go of its neck. And then it became very evident that something was very, very wrong. The jockey lost grip of the horse's neck and then just kind of slid off of the horse and fell onto the racetrack. Officials ran over to try to help him, but when they got there, it was already too late. Frank Hayes was dead. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it's believed that after Sweet Kiss took the lead, Frank Hayes' heart gave out as a result of his intense training, mixed with the overwhelming thought that he might actually win this race. Don't forget, he lost a lot of weight in a very short period of time just to even qualify for this race. What's wild is it's believed that he actually died during the race itself, meaning that his lifeless body somehow managed to stay on this horse during the final leg of this race and when they crossed the finish line. Frank Hayes was buried in his colorful racing silks 3 days later. He is the only person in sports history to win a competition despite being dead. So that's going to do it, folks. Thank you for tuning in. In fact, stay tuned in next Friday, and I will be posting an iconic New York City 4th of July story that you won't want to miss. Easy way to remember that is click the subscribe button down below and click the notification bell. Also, please like the video, comment on the video, let me know your favorite sports team and the ridiculous curse associated with whatever sports team you root for is. I'm a New York Jets fan, so I'm just cursed for life at this point. See you next time, folks. Deuces, kids.